Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed yesterday's reading, and I think it went a lot smoother. I think I'm getting a little better at reading, a little bit. But yeah, yesterday we went over, what did we go over? The choice of a path, I believe, right? Yes. And today's chapter will be the method of the Kabbalah in Dion Fortune's The Mystical Qabalah. So let's begin today, just like every day. Welcome to the Arcanum Luminarium. Alrighty, and so we shall pick up with Chapter 3, The Method of the Kabbalah. Speaking of the method of the Kabbalah, one of the ancient rabbis says that an angel coming down to earth would have to take on human form in order to converse with men. The curious symbol system known to us as the Tree of Life is an attempt to reduce the diagrammatic form every force and factor in the manifested universe and the soul of man, to correlate them to another and reveal them spread out as on a map so that the relative positions of each unit can be seen and the relations between them traced. In brief, the Tree of Life is a compendium of science, psychology, philosophy, and theology. The student of the Kabbalah goes to work in exactly the opposite to the students of the natural sciences. The latter builds up synthetic concepts, the former analyzes abstract concepts. It goes without saying, however, that before a concept can be analyzed, it must first be assembled. Someone must have thought out the principles that are resumed in the symbols, which is the object of the meditation of the Kabbalah. Who then were the first Kabbalists? Who built up this whole scheme? The rabbis are unanimous upon this point. They were angels. In other words, it was beings of another order of creation, then humanity, who gave the chosen people their Kabbalah. To the modern mind, this may be as absurd a statement as the doctrine that babies are found under gooseberry bushes. But if we study the many mystical systems of comparative religion, we find that all the Illuminati are in agreement upon this point. All men and women who have had practical experience of the spiritual life tell us that they are taught by divine beings. We shall be very foolish if we altogether disregard such a cloud of witnesses, especially those of us who have never had any personal experience of the higher states of consciousness. There are some psychologists who will tell us that the angels of the Kabbalists and the gods of the Manus of other systems are our own repressed complexes. There are others with less limited outlooks who will tell us that these divine beings are the latent capacities of our own higher selves. To the devotional mystic, this is not the point of any great moment. He gets his results, that is all he cares about. But the philosophical mystic, in other words, the occultist, thinks the matter out and arrives at a certain conclusion. These conclusions, however, can only be understood when we know what we mean by reality and have a clear line of demarcation between the subjective and the objective. Anyone who is trained in philosophical method knows that this is asking a good deal. The Indian school of the metaphysics has most elaborate and intricate systems of philosophy, which attempt to define these ideas and render them thinkable, and through generations of seers have given their lives to the task. The concepts still remain so abstract that it is only after a long course of discipline, called the Yoga of the East, that the mind is able to apprehend them at all. The Kabbalist goes to work in different ways. He does not attempt to make the mind rise up on the wings of metaphysics into the rarefied air of abstract reality. He formulates a concrete symbol that the eye can see and lets it represent the abstract reality that no untrained human mind can grasp. It is exactly the same principle as algebra. Let x represent the unknown quantity, let y represent the half of x, and let z represent something we know. If we begin to experiment with y to find out its relation to z and in what portions, It soon ceases to be entirely unknown. We have learned something at any rate about it, and if we are sufficiently skillful, we may in the end be able to express y in terms of z, and then we shall begin to understand x. There are great many symbols which are used as objects of meditation. The cross of the Christendom, God forms in the Egyptian system, phallic symbols, and other faiths. These symbols are used by the uninitiated as a means of concentrating the mind and introducing it into certain thoughts, calling upon certain associate ideas and stimulations, certain feelings. The initiate, however, uses a symbol system differently. He uses it as an algebra by means of which he will read the secret of unknown potencies. In other words, he uses the symbols as a means of guiding thought out into the unseen and incomprehensible. And how does he do this? He does it by using composite symbols, a symbol which is unattached unit which would not serve his purpose. In contemplating such a composite symbol as the tree of life, he observes that there are definite relations between its parts. There are some parts of which he knows something. There are others of which he can intuit something, or more crudely make a guess reasoning from the first principles. The mind leaps from one known to another known, and in so doing traverse certain distances. Metaphorical speaking, it is like a traveler in the desert who knows the situation of two oases and makes a forced march between them. He would never have dared to push out into the desert from the first oasis if he had not known the location of a second. But at the end of the journey, he not only knows more about the characteristics of the second oasis, but he has also observed the country lying between them, thus making forced march from oasis to oasis, backwards and forwards across the desert. He gradually explores it. Nevertheless, the desert is incapable of supporting life. So it is with the Kabbalistic systems of notion. The things as rendered are unthinkable, and yet the mind tracking from the symbol to symbol manages to think about them, and although we have content to see in a glass darkly, yet we have every reason to hope that ultimately we shall see face to face and know even as we are known. For the human mind grows by exercise, and that which was at first unthinkable as mathematics to the child who cannot manage his sums finally comes within the range of our realization. By thinking about a thing, we build concepts of it. It is said that the thought grew out of language, not language out of thought. What words are to thought? Symbols are to intuition. Curious as it may seem, the symbol precedes the elucidation. That is why we declare that the Kabbalah is a growing system and not a historic monument. There is more to be got out of Kabbalistic symbols today, and there was in a time of a more old dispensation, because our mental content is richer in ideas. How much more, for instance, does the Sefer Yesod, wherein works the forces of growth and reproduction, mean to the biologist than to ancient rabbis? Everything that has to do with growing and reproduction is resumed in the sphere of the moon. But this sphere, as represented upon the tree of life, is set about the paths leading to other Sephiroth. Therefore, the biological Kabbalist knows that there is much to be certain definite relationships between the forces subsumed in Yesod, and those represented by the symbols assigned to these paths. Brooding over these symbols, he gets glimpses of relationships that do not reveal themselves when the material aspect of things are considered. And when he comes to work these out in the material of his study, he finds that therein are hidden important clues. And so upon the tree, one thing leads to another. Explanation of hidden causes arise out of the proportions and relations of various individual symbols, composing his almighty synthetic glyph. Each symbol, moreover, admits of an interpretation upon the different planes, and through its astrological associations can be related to the gods of any pantheon, thus opening up vast new fields of implication in which the mind ranges endlessly. Symbols lead on to symbols in an unbroken chain of association. Symbol confirming symbol as the many branches thread gather themselves together into a synthetic glyph once more. and each symbol capable of interpretation in terms of whatever plane the mind may be functioning upon. This mighty, all-embracing glyph of the soul of man and of the universe, by the virtue of its logical associations of symbols, evoke images of the mind. But these images are not randomly evolved, but follow along well-defined associate tracks in the universal mind. The symbol of the tree is the universal mind. What the dream is to the individual ego. It is a glyph of synthesis, from subconsciousness to represent the hidden forces. The universe is really a thought form projected from the mind of God. The Kabbalist tree must be likened to the dream picture arising from the subconsciousness of God and dramatizing the subconscious content of deity. In other words, if the universe is the conscious end product of the mental activity of the Logos, the tree is a symbolic representation of the raw material of the divine consciousness and the processes wherein the universe came into being. But the tree applies not only to the macrocosm, but to the microcosm, which, as all occultists realize, is a replica in miniature. It is for this reason that the divination is possible. The little understood and much malaligned art has for its philosophical basis of the system of correspondence represented by the symbols. The correspondence between the soul of man and the universe are not arbitrary, but arise out of the developmental identities. Certain aspects of the consciousness were developed in response to certain phases of evolution and therefore embody the same principle. Consequently, they react to the same influences. A man's soul is like a lagoon connected with the sea by a submerging channel. Although to all outward seeming it is landlocked, nevertheless its water level rising and falls with the tides of the sea because of the hidden connections. So it is with human consciousness. There is a subconscious connection between each individual soul and the world soul, deep hidden in the most primitive depths of subconsciousness, and in consequence we share in the rise and fall of this cosmic tide. Each symbol upon the tree represents a cosmic force or factor. When the mind concentrates upon it, it comes into touch with that force. In other words, the surface channel, a channel in consciousness, has been made between the conscious mind and of the individual and particular factors in the world soul. And through this channel, the waters of the ocean pour into the lagoon. The aspirant who uses the tree as its meditative symbol establishes point by point the union between his soul and the world soul. This results in a tremendous access of energy to the individual soul. It is this which endows it with magical powers. But just as the universe must be ruled by God, so must the many-sided soul of man be ruled by its gods, the spirit of man. The higher self must dominate its universe, or there will be unbalanced forces. Each factor will rule its own aspect, and they will war among themselves. Then do we have the rule of the kings of Edom, whose kingdoms are in balanced forces. Thus do we see in the tree a glyph of the soul of man and the universe, and in legends associated with it in history, of evolution, of the soul, and the way of initiation. And that is the end of that chapter. Starting to get into the meat and potatoes of her a little bit. Got a little more familiar with the tree of life. Generally, I guess. And tomorrow we will be going over the next chapter, which is entitled The Unwritten Kabbalah. Well, I hope you've enjoyed these readings, and I will be back again tomorrow to continue on with this book. I hope you're enjoying these videos. Still getting used to it, but I think we're getting a little better. They're running a little smoother. And yeah. What else is there to say but have a wonderful day. See you tomorrow.